So I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which I don't. I mean, I'm an evangelist for meditation, but you don't have to do this. I was trying to write a book, so I needed something to write about. So I write about Spring. Spring, who appears to be in her 30s, is the embodiment of everything that most bothers me about the meditation world. She's really working that speaking softly thing. Every S is sibilant. Every word is over-enunciated. She wears shawls. She's probably really militant about recycling. As the retreat goes on, I have a moment of real crisis where I'm losing my mind. And Spring saved me. And she gave me the advice that really allowed me to stop driving myself crazy. And what followed was probably the happiest 36 hours of my life. So she emerges as the hero of this chapter. But I was very worried I was going to change her name maybe, so I sent her the chapter for her to read before the book came out. And she wrote me an email basically laughing digitally. So you're a very good sport. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I haven't seen her since. So thank you.
You want to let us know what that advice was that she imparted to you?
Yeah, stop trying so hard. Oh. I was doing what a lot of type A people do when they meditate, which is I was just kind of banging my head against the wall and really striving. And what she said, the first thing she said when she was leading the meditation, which is, you don't have to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to get somewhere. I don't know where I was trying to get, but I was clearly trying to get somewhere. And she basically said meditation is unlike anything else you do in your life where you do a thing and expect a certain result. So I went into the next meditation thing, and I'm not going to expect anything. Not going to expect anything. I was actually thinking about going home at this point. And I then had this, it wasn't magical or metaphysical, but I had a real feeling of clarity where everything that was happening, I was right there with it, and it was very vivid. And that lasted for a while. And if you know anything about the Buddha, one of the things he says is that nothing lasts, and that state of clarity was not permanent. It was great while it lasted, and it really gave me faith and confidence about going forward with meditation, that there was something to it.
Well, we're in flux and impermanent now. Do you feel in the moment right now?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Just want to get that out of the way. Let me actually take you back. I want to get into meditation with you and so many of the, I think, important issues that you raise in your book. But take you back to about a year ago. We were supposed to do this together, some of you may recall, about a year ago. And Dan was sent out on an assignment at the time to Toronto. And I'm just wondering, in talking about your work, and let's talk about your work at least for a while, when you get sent out on an assignment like that, I mean, all things are going, the adrenaline's pumping, you don't know what to expect. That was actually in light of an explosion, and there was question about terrorism. This was in Toronto, as I recall.
Yeah, I think it was, what's the capital of Canada? Is it Ontario?
Oh, it was Ottawa. I'm sorry.
Ottawa, yeah. Ottawa, when a gunman walked into the Parliament and
shot up
the Parliament. Yeah.
So when you go out on an assignment like that now, that you've been through the whole meditation training and everything, you calm yourself down, or do you feel you need that edge and you have to have that edge? How's that work?
That was a really interesting experience because the first day it happened, I was at the airport getting ready to come here for this and to give another talk, I saw the news on my phone and I realized I have to tell them I'm at the airport. And so I told them and they said, okay, you're going to Canada. And so I kind of I let go of all the plans I had. I emailed Daniel and said I can't come, and et cetera, and I kind of got into this pretty laid back state of I'm just going to go with the flow here, and I did a pretty job that night. I got an email from my boss saying, like, yeah, there was something off. You just didn't you didn't have the intensity that this story required. And I realized you can, and I do this all the time, you can misapply the lessons of meditation. And I do that sometimes where I'll just get overly resigned or relaxed. But the proposition of mindfulness and meditation is not that you should be kind of lifeless and laid back. It is that you should be not yanked around by your ego or the voice in your head. And you can be very deeply engaged and intense if the situation requires it, but you don't need to be reacting reflexively and habitually to everything that pops into your head.
This is a tough balance, though, especially for someone who describes himself as a type A personality. Plus, I can't help thinking about, there's a play by, some of the people in the audience may know the playwright Carol Churchill, brilliant British playwright, and she's being a little, I think, parodic, that is, having some fun and satire, but there's a Buddhist character in there who's so laid back that he becomes unable really to do anything. There are people who are dying in fire and so forth, and what's the difference? I'm kind of mellow and I don't need to go in there and save anybody. I'm in my own kind of mellowness and everything. There's always that danger of getting sucked into total relaxation or not having the edge, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I've never experienced total relaxation, but
well, something approximating it.
you can have like a weak facsimile of that for sure, or you can talk yourself into not caring or not trying, and that's what I did that first night in Ottawa. I just kind of went with the flow, and the product wasn't very good. The next day, I woke up kind of miserable about having screwed up the night before, and that the stories were much better. So yeah, it is a balance. I mean, the way I think about it is, if you want to do great things in your career, in your parenting, in your volunteer work, I think there's a certain amount of plotting and planning and stress. It's just part of the deal. But we tend to make it worse than it needs to be. And so I think mindfulness, which I define, mindfulness it's an incredibly rich term, has lots of definitions, but one way to think of it is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it.
Including those voices that go on. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. If there are several voices, you might want to see a professional. But usually there's one, and in my case, as I say in the first line of the book, he's an asshole. And what I find with mindfulness is that you're able to draw the line between useless rumination and what I call constructive anguish. And there's a certain amount of worrying and plotting and planning that we have to do. But on the 17th time that you're worrying about something, as my meditation teacher likes to say, maybe ask yourself, is this useful? And that can jar you out of going down the rabbit hole of senseless and non-constructive
all that negativity
worry.
And chattering and stuff that doesn't.
A certain amount of negativity will serve.
Yeah. But you, have sort of used yourself as an example of someone who benefited enormously from it. I remember seeing a shrink years ago who said to me, if you can be 10% happier, you've really made a quantum leap in your life. And you've now,
he said this before my book?
Before your book came out, yes. I'll even cite him.
You don't know, did you inquire about copyright or anything?
His name was Pierre Mornell, and he wrote a book called Passive Men, Wild Women. And it was largely drawn from many couples in Mill Valley. The guy would come home and he'd be working very hard, and he'd see his wife and he'd want attention, she'd want attention and so forth. That's why the Wild Women. And, he'd just want to open a beer can and watch the game or something like that. And there would be this, shall we say, dissonance between them. And he had some solutions for that. But he actually said 10%, which was one of the things that first struck me when I saw your book, and emphasized that if you're going 10%, you're really going a lot, and maybe making much more progress than it sounds like, because 10% doesn't sound like that much. We, after all, leave tips of 20% usually if we're thoughtful with gratuities. So let me ask you, when you find yourself feeling, because you talk about happiness, what is happiness to you? What does it mean to be happy? It's a word that's always eluded me, to tell you the truth. I know it says by Americans we're given this authority to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
But to actually know happiness, what does that mean?
I've asked a lot of people because I've struggled with what happiness is, and the very roots of the word in our language reflect the ambivalence we have about the idea, because hap is luck, haphazard, hapless, and so I think we don't really know what happiness is. The best definition I've heard is from a guy in New York City who's a shrink and also writes books about sort of the overlap between Buddhism and psychology. His name is Dr. Mark Epstein, and we were having dinner one night, and I asked him, how would you define it?
Had him on the forum program.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a great guy, very close friend, and I asked him, what is happiness in your view? And he gave me an answer that was kind of initially unsatisfying, but the more I've lived with it, the more I think it's actually the best I've ever heard, which is more of the good stuff and less of the bad. And by which he's not referring to sort of more ice cream and less, divorce. He means more internal joy and positive emotions and less negative emotions. So I kind of think of it like a graph. I've never been good at math, but like if you have this is the y-axis. So for most of this is x. Don't correct me again. We have the x-axis. So this is the good stuff and this is the bad stuff. So for me, I feel like, generally speaking, good stuff happens, and then you return to your happiness set point. This is a psychological term. Good stuff happens for us. We're there, we're happy, and then we come back to our set point. And then bad stuff happens.
I'm a real believer in set points, yeah.
What's that?
I'm a real believer in set points.
I think there's something to it for sure. And then bad stuff happens, you go below the set point, but we tend to revert back to our set point over time. I think with meditation, the top end of the graph gets higher because you're actually enjoying what's happening right now and you're not rushing on to the next thing. And the lower end of the graph gets more shallow because you aren't feeding your unhappiness with compulsive worry. And what I also think happens over time is that, so the top of the graph gets bigger, the bottom of the graph gets more shallow, and then your happiness set point goes up. That, in my view, is the sort of mathematical, graphical visualization of what's happened for me personally with meditation.
Well, it's well described because there's empirical evidence that suggests exactly what you say coming out of meditation, and also out of being more bountiful and more generous to other people, more empathic and so forth, actually can bring up the set point and can make you more at ease with yourself and get rid of that restlessness and those voices and so forth. When you describe your own sense of happiness, and then you talk about the Buddha, and mindfulness is more associated with Buddhism probably than anything else, because the great teachers of Buddhism talk about mindfulness. The Buddhists tell us that the basic human condition is one of suffering. I don't want to necessarily get off on this tangent, but I'm sure you're well aware of that. So the idea of happiness, they're some of the happiest people I've ever met are some of these monks, who are filled with Rinpoches and everything. They have this sense of joy that's really infectious. But you often find the fact that when you study Buddhism, it's telling you that because we're in flux, because things are impermanent, our basic condition is one of suffering.
So actually, Buddhism is my favorite topic of all time. So to me, it's not a tangent. Suffering, so the Buddha is known for his sort of most famous declaration is that life is suffering. So the Buddhists get a pretty bad reputation as a consequence for being, let's say, downcast. But it's actually it's a translation error. The more accurate translation might be unsatisfying. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because we live in a world, as you said, where nothing lasts, and so we are constantly grasping onto things that won't last, and as a consequence, we suffer, or things are not satisfying. And in this kind of environment, nothing can fully satisfy because nothing will last. But he goes on to say that there's a cure for this, a way to sort of relax into the flux of the world that will provide a truly lasting happiness. Now,
it's called extinction.
This is
depending on the translation.
Yes,
It's
nirvana,
consciousness.
yes,
Yeah,
it
ego goes down, and
Yes.
yeah.
Well, nirvana is, you're actually not far off. Nirvana is sort of the blowing out of the flames
It is
of
extinction,
desire.
yeah.
Yes. Extinguishing. Now, I'm not sure, because I haven't tasted it for myself, whether this kind of, imperturbability is in fact available. It is what is advertised in Buddhism, but I am not enlightened, so I don't know. But I think I can tell you, having done some of the preliminary work, that it will boost your happiness along the way, and maybe you get this extinguishing that he's talking about.
Your knowledge of Buddhism, which is fairly impressive, comes also, I imagine, to some degree out of the fact that Peter Jennings kind of assigned you to cover religious territory, and that became your beat, not necessarily to your happiness.
No. No. I was a young guy, and Peter was my mentor, and he took me aside and said, "You are going to cover faith and spirituality for ABC News." And I think my response was, "No, I'm not going to do that." And this is the joke I make in my talks that always, for some reason, gets the biggest response. But I grew up in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, and I did have a bar mitzvah, but I did it only for the money, and which is true, $6,000, which is a lot. All confiscated by my parents, communists. So I had no interest in. My parents are deeply secular. My mom, I remember sitting me down and telling me that not only is there no Santa Claus, but there's also no God. This was the kind
in
of
the same breath.
She might have taken a breath, but definitely in the same sentence, maybe with like a
You
semicolon.
don't have to worry
in
about
there.
Santa Claus
Yes.
if you're Jewish, though.
Yeah. Well, I'm half Jewish, so she's a shiksa. You know that word as a Yiddish aficionado. Means non-Jew.
Actually, its original meaning is like someone who's full of pollution. It became it became accepted in sort of American lexicon largely because of things like Seinfeld, where they had shik's appeal instead of sex appeal
I
and
see,
all
I
this,
see.
played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who happens to be Jewish. But it's become an acceptable secular word, but in its old meaning, its etymological meaning, it's actually, because the Jews were so ghettoized and shtetlized, that somebody who was not Jewish was considered heathen and all that, infidel.
But my grandfather, the Jewish grandfather, the first time he met my mom, called her a shiksa and walked out of the room. So anyway, that's a real digression.
I think they're enjoying it, though, aren't they?
So I came from this family that there was not a lot of religion, suffice it to say. And after this assignment, I ended up spending a lot of time in mega churches and Mormon temples and mosques and stuff like that. And it actually was great for me, because I saw how ignorant I was on this subject, and I saw the value of having a worldview that transcends your own narrow interests.
So it awakened you in a sense?
Not really. I was still an idiot. What awakened me was really none of those faiths spoke to me personally, really. I thought of it as a good story, and I learned a lot. But it wasn't until many years after I started covering religion when I read a book that was recommended to me by one of my producers as a possible story by a guy named Eckhart Tolle, who, we're in San
Spiritual
Francisco,
teacher.
you guys all know
Would-be
he is, right?
spiritual teacher, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I had never heard of him.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'll stop there. If we can talk about Eckhart Tolle if you want.
Well, I think I know a little bit of your narrative. He did have some impact on you, but you never really bought into it, did you?
Yeah, so Eckhart Tolle is like, again, most of you are familiar with him. I hadn't heard of him. Oprah loves him. This was the pitch from my producer. She was like, Oprah loves this guy. Apparently she put all of his a copy of his book in every bedroom of every house she owns. And Paris Hilton had carried his book into jail when she was doing time for DUI. And so I sounded like weird enough to make a good television story, but I didn't suspect that it was going to be meaningful to me. So and I got the book in the mail and I started to read it, and I thought initially that it was I think the scientific term is bullshit. Like the hardest of the hardcore bullshit. It was filled with all this grandiose language about, pseudoscientific language about vibrational fields and grandiose claims about spiritual awakenings, about how the book was going to provoke for you, the reader, a spiritual awakening, and how after his own spiritual awakening, he lived in London for 2 years on a park bench, or park benches, plural, in a state of bliss. I'm not a meteorologist, but I think they have winter in London. And I kept reading, though, out of deference to my producer, or maybe I just didn't have anything else to do. And that is when I discovered the thesis that really did change my life, which is that Eckhart Tolle was the first person I ever heard talk about the voice in the head. By which he was not referring to schizophrenia or hearing voices. He's talking about your inner narrator. The voice that chases you out of bed in the morning and is yammering at you all day long, has you constantly wanting stuff, not wanting stuff, judging other people, comparing yourself to other people, thinking about the past or thinking about the future to the detriment of whatever's happening right now. I have a friend named Sam Harris. We're not related, but he also wrote a book about meditation, and he
actually trained at Berkeley in linguistics.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And he went to Stanford,
Right.
but he dropped out to go on the Dharma Trail, do drugs. So we have that in common.
Sam's a good guy.
Yeah. So Sam has a joke about, he says when he thinks about the voice in his head, he feels like he's been hijacked by the most boring person alive. Says the same shit over and over, most of it negative, all of it self-referential. And Tolle's argument is when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation that you are having with yourself, it yanks you around. It's why you have your hand in the fridge when you're not hungry, or you're checking your email in the middle of a conversation with somebody, or you're losing your temper when it's strategically unwise. And so that, for me, was the aha moment, this sort of inciting event that started the weird little journey that led me to right now.
But the biggest event in terms of your journey was a sort of on-air Waterloo, and let's talk about that, because you had a panic attack. You're on the air. You had some 5 million listeners, viewers. I think you actually got the metric on it, right? It was over 5 million.
5.019.
Yeah, all right. So, and suddenly, you got a panic attack.
Yeah, it was a full-on panic attack,
Yeah.
for sure.
And you had to go to, like I had to do when Jerry Garcia, I was interviewing once, he put some cocaine up his nose. I went to a public service announcement because I thought, we can't do this in the studio, and you couldn't go along with your panic attack. But as I understand it, a lot of it you discovered was brought on by some drug use. But let me go back to this, because I think it's an important trajectory. You had the guts and the courage, really, to go to Iraq and Afghanistan, and you were winning your spurs, winning your stripes. So you go to Afghanistan and Iraq, and then you come back because, and start to get depressed because what, there's not the highs anymore, basically?
Yeah, no, you said it well. Jerry Garcia and I have something in common. I spent a lot of time in war zones as a young reporter. This is pre-Eckhart Tolle, before really I got into covering religion too. I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also covered the Second Intifada in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. And then I came home and got depressed. And I didn't actually know I was depressed. I was having trouble getting out of bed, and felt like I had a low-grade fever all the time. And then I started doing drugs. So I'd never really done drugs before, although as we discussed at dinner, I did have a robust little weed business in 8th grade. But
You did some inhaling when you were
yes,
young. Yeah.
I smoked
Unlike
weed,
Clinton.
but not like hard drugs. But I was 32, and somebody offered me cocaine, and I tried it, and I felt better. And I sort of retrospective analysis of this from my shrink is that I had become addicted to the adrenaline of the war zone, and this was like a synthetic squirt of it, and so then I started using cocaine. Not all the time. It wasn't. I say this a lot, but it wasn't like the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, where he's like doing lewds all the time. It was it's pretty sporadic, and definitely not when I was working, and not when I was on the air. But after I had that panic attack on Good Morning America, I went to a doctor who is still my doctor, and this was 11 years ago, and he said, he asked me a bunch of questions to try to get to the root of the problem, and one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And I said, yeah. And he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that said, okay, moron, a mystery solved. And he explained that even though I had been doing it only intermittently, it was enough to artificially raise the level of adrenaline in my brain and prime me to freak out. So that actually, you're right, was the kind of the inciting event for the book. But it took a lot of time between that, which happened in 2004, and me stumbling upon Eckhart Tolle, which happened in 2008.
You've got a big trajectory here of years, but does meditation give you, to some extent, what drugs were able to give you?
Definitely not. Drugs are 10 times more fun. That being said, when the 36 hours post my discussion with Spring, let's just put it this way, drugs work faster and more reliably than...
Don't take as much time.
Yeah, meditation is harder. After my discussion with Spring, in which I'd say a breakthrough would probably be the right... it wasn't an experience of nirvana, but it was an experience of the cessation of the kind of suffering that I had been enduring, self-imposed. That actually felt, in some ways, like taking ecstasy, but without the synthetic feel of it. You know, like it's always about to end, or I know that I have chemicals running through my body. It felt very clean and hyper real. So I don't think meditation does for me what it's not an adrenalized thing. I think what it does is it allows you to see the urges, that the mindlessness that is what led to me going to war zones without thinking about the consequences, coming home, getting depressed, and not being aware enough to know it, and then mindlessly using drugs to combat the depression. I think that kind of cascade of mindless behavior, mindfulness is the antidote to that.
So, for example, what would you tell, there are a lot of parents here this evening, what do you tell parents about drug use and what they should tell their kids or how they should handle it? You've got an 18-month-old kid. What are you going to tell her? Him, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's 10 months, and I don't know what I'm going to tell him because I wrote this book before we knew we were going to have a kid. So I think I'm now going to be stuck with the honesty strategy. You know, my father said that the toughest thing about having kids is watching them make their own mistakes. So I think I'll just tell him, I mean, it's not like I glorify the drugs in the book. I mean, it led to me having the most embarrassing moment of my life. So if he wants to have an embarrassing moment of his own, go for it. I would do my best to tell him not to do it, but I don't think that preaching is a particularly successful strategy. So I have to, I'm right now working on changing diapers without getting all over me. So once I get past that stage, I'll get to the drug stage.
And mindfulness can help with that too.
Luckily, he doesn't speak English. So.
Do you think, you say mindfulness also, or mindful meditation has made you more compassionate. How does that work? How do you become more compassionate through mindful meditation?
So that's actually a bigger question than you might realize, or maybe you do realize. You probably do realize you're Michael Krasny, so you probably know exactly. So there are many kinds of meditation, and the word meditation is a bit like the word sports. It just describes a whole wide range of activities. The kind of meditation that Spring and the tradition in which Spring and I studied, there is this sort of meditation that is primarily rotates around mindfulness, seeing clearly what's happening right now. But then there's also a kind of meditation called compassion meditation. And Spring was actually the first person to ever teach me how to do it. As it won't surprise anybody here, I hated it. It felt like, you know, Valentine's Day with a machete to my throat, where you like picture a bunch of people and systematically send them good vibes. However, there's been a lot of science that suggests that this kind of meditation does create physiological and behavioral change. And there's furthermore, for somebody like me, a lot of evidence that, and the best research really has been done in the Bay Area, both at Stanford and at UC Berkeley, that shows that people who are compassionate are healthier, happier, more popular, and more successful. Yeah. That being said, I also think that mindfulness meditation, which a lot of people worry, there's this big hullabaloo in the meditation world right now about the secularizing of meditation, the fact that it's now being just sold as just pure mindfulness. And a lot of Buddhists worry that you're taking this this one piece of the Buddhist tradition and just focusing on that, and you're not focusing as much on compassion and ethics and things like that.
I mean, it's what happens to most Eastern philosophies when they get into American popular culture. Look at yoga, for example.
Yes, yeah, right. But my view is that that mindfulness leads inexorably to greater compassion, because when you realize how crazy you are, you can't help but realize that everybody's crazy, and it just calms you down and makes you more empathic. And that's a question of degree. It may be different for different people. I think compassion meditation is also a great thing to do. I do it to this day. But I do think mindfulness, notwithstanding some of the legitimate concerns that people have about the secularization of it, will lead to better behavior.
It's also changing brain chemistry. It's changing the way you're wired, really, isn't it?
I
mean, the evidence is there. It's abundant evidence, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of science on meditation, and people like me tout it a lot because it really works with secular audiences. There's some danger of overhyping it on a couple of levels. One is the science is still really in its early stages, and some of the science is just crappy, and some of it is good, but it's too early to say to make any grand claims. I think what we can safely say is that the science strongly suggests a long list of health benefits, and the most tantalizing stuff has to do with the rewiring of the brain. So what we're learning now is that the brain, which we used to think was kind of fixed at a certain age, pretty young age, is in fact plastic for until you die. It is the organ of experience, and it changes in response to experience. And what that really means, where the rubber hits the road, is that, and why this is interesting to all of us beyond being an academic issue, is that you can train your mind, you can train your brain just the way you can train your bicep in the gym. And that is a radical and empowering notion. And I think most of us assume, consciously or subconsciously, that happiness is dependent on exogenous factors, like the quality of our childhood, the quality of our marriage, did we get a raise recently? All of that is really important. But what the meditation science suggests is that happiness is in fact a skill. And that is really a game-changing proposition. And and the other thing I'd just say about the science is that I don't know many people who've given meditation a good shot, a couple weeks, a couple months, who say it's a waste of time. And when you do it, you don't continue. You may start to meditate because you hear about the science, but you don't continue to meditate because you think your prefrontal cortex is changing. You continue to meditate because you're less of a jerk, and you're less of a jerk to yourself and others, and you're happier. So the science is like a useful sales tool. I also think it's good in and of itself to know more about the mind and the brain and the interrelation. But for those of us who are just regular rank and file meditators or meditation curious, it's really just about what the reality is and how it changes your life.
Just a footnote, I sometimes have this sense of fear and loathing that maybe our brains are changing, or our neural pathways are changing by using the machines and the iPhones and smartphones so much, especially starting at a young age, as many of our children do. But that's,
I think they are.
yeah, I'm afraid they are too. But I want to get back to happiness for a moment with you, and then we'll
Would you
open
like some
things
water?
up. No, I'm fine, thanks. See how compassionate he is?
So, you know, I didn't want to give it to you.
Really?
I'm really thirsty.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
He's got his own cup.
Now I'm feeling guilty that I didn't ask you if you wanted water. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about your work for just a couple minutes here, because I know people have questions they want to ask you, and you got a lot of fans here. You've been a real versatile broadcaster. I mean, in that you've done, I just saw you recently doing one of the Datelines. Done Good Morning America. You've done reporting out in the field. Been embedded, you know, in some pretty serious and dangerous situations, as we remarked upon everything. Presently, I mean, in terms of just that whole range of things, I mean, even just reading copy is and anchoring, you know, which is what anchors do. What gives you most high?
There are two things that I get the most excited about. The one is this traditional journalism that we still get to do. So tomorrow night I'll fly from here to El Salvador, where we're doing a story about this sort of symbiotic relationship between the gangs in El Salvador and the gangs in the United States. It's kind of like this rotation of prison to street. No, so street to prison to deportation to El Salvador, from prison there to the streets, sneaking back into America.
Can we back up just for a minute? Because I wonder,
Yeah.
when you go into El Salvador, I remember when Peter Jennings, your mentor, came here when the Loma Prieta earthquake took place, there was a lot of criticism. Came in on a private plane, had the hair blow drying and everything, and then they had the pictures all taken with what looked like the destruction from the earthquake. I mean, this is not what you do with journalism, is it?
I have less and less hair to blow dry.
Me too.
I work with a very small team. Often it's just me and a cameraman, a producer who is also a camera operator. So this team will be me, two producers, both of whom, one male, one female, both of whom will be operating cameras, and then we'll have a translator. So we have, but that's a big for us. Usually it's just two people, and I, you know, carry stuff, and it's not super glamorous. But to me, to tell a really good and really important story like that is incredibly exhilarating.
They line up who you're going to interview and everything on that, or do you do any of the sort of spate work yourself?
You know, I'm pretty lazy. So we have a lot of meetings where we talk about sort of what it is we want to get, and the producers do a lot of the work of sort of lining stuff up. But mostly it's sort of about finding yourself in the right place or the wrong place at the right time, and trying to capture. What I want in television is for action to unfold in front of the lens. So I don't want to tell stories retrospectively. I don't want to interview people about things that have happened. I want to see things happen, because this is a visual medium. So you really want to think strategically about being in places where things are going to happen. So we'll try to produce it in such a way that the odds are things will happen while we're there. So we've spent a lot of time. They've already made a trip down there to make contacts, and so we'll spend a lot of time thinking about that. So that's, just to answer your question, this kind of work really gets me excited. But I also, on the less serious side of it, love being a morning. So I have two jobs, two anchor jobs at ABC News. One of them is I anchor Nightline, which is a pretty straight anchor job where it's just me and a camera, and I read off the prompter, and that's fine. But I also anchor the weekend edition of Good Morning America, and it's me and four other lunatics sitting at a desk, and it's mayhem. And I really enjoy it. I have to get up at 3:45 in the morning on the weekends, which isn't this awesome, but my meditation practice has been a huge part of learning how to get better at this job, because I'm not in control. I'm the guy in the center, and to a certain extent, kind of the MC of it, but I can't control what all these other people are going to say, and learning how to relax into that and listen to what people are saying so I can react spontaneously has been a really good practice for me.
You once described yourself as excessively ambitious. You still feel that way?
I'm definitely still ambitious. I was giving a talk in LA recently, and somebody asked me just this question, and my agent was in the room, and he said, "Can I answer this question?" He said, "He's very ambitious." Yeah, I'm definitely ambitious.
Where would you like to see this trajectory go? I mean, any pipe dreams in terms of your career, or where it would be headed, or where you'd like it to see it headed?
So I have 2 tracks. I mean, I definitely want to keep writing books, and we're starting an app. Me and my meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein, are starting an app to teach meditation to beginners, and I want to grow that into a big business, and which I see as a way to benefit Dharma teachers and also to teach a lot of people how to.
This also wanting to do good? Is that playing?
Definitely,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And in journalism, there are bigger jobs for sure, and I wouldn't say no to some of them. But I'm actually, here's the thing that's different, is that I am much more keenly aware of my good fortune now. And so while I can see jobs that would be awesome, it used to, I think, prevent me from enjoying what I had. I'm incredibly happy with it. If I had my current portfolio until retirement, I'd be extremely happy.
One more question, because happen to be interviewing Ted Koppel tomorrow, who was predecessor anchor on Nightline before Dan took it over, and was there for many years. Some of you even remember, America Under Siege with the Iranian crisis and the embassy being held hostage, and that was really what launched Nightline big time. Koppel, I imagine, I would sort of suspect, was probably an influence, maybe even a mentor of sorts to you. But who else besides Jennings or maybe Koppel, who were your models?
Jennings, for sure, was the big one.
Yeah.
Although we're different in a lot of ways. He wasn't.
He may be more pro-Israel than he was?
Have a big.
He took a lot of flack.
Yeah, he took a lot of flack for being. But I don't think he was anti-Israel. I think he was sometimes antisocial. He could be very mean to people. He also, I don't think he would disapprove of me being a morning television person. In fact, I was dabbling with morning television when he was alive, and he was actively disapproving. So, he didn't. I think there's real value to having having a personality on television that is more open, and because I think then people listen to you, and I wouldn't have been able to write a book like this if I was just a traditional news anchor that people didn't have any sense of me as a 360-degree human.
Those anchors, I mean, like Jennings and Rather and
they
Brokaw,
were on the mountaintop.
they were almost like,
yes.
being on the Supreme Court before.
Yes.
I was interviewing people that were justices of the Supreme Court, but that's a whole new era now.
Yes.
It never went on before, and those anchors were kind of above everything. Yeah.
Correct, and that's not really my style. So we're different in a lot of ways. Koppel is, absolutely a role model. Charlie Rose, somebody I think is extremely good. Diane Sawyer.
It's been a real pleasure, I must say, talking to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your book, your career, your new child, fairly new child, and
pretty new.
Thank you to Wanda and to Daniel, and thank you to all of you for your attention.
Yeah,
much appreciated.
Appreciate it. Nice job. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.